Have you ever been so lazy that you were too complacent to realize there was a lazier way to do something? No? That's just me? Well, I was, and it cost me great shots. Photographers, don't make the same mistake I did, because once you know how to set up C1, C2, and C3 on your Canon camera, your camera becomes lightning fast. I'll show you some of the presets I use, and stick around because I'll show you some troubleshooting tips later on in the video. C1, C2, and C3 are called custom shooting modes. You can think of them as memory slots for your camera. You store your favorite setup once, and then you can recall it instantly with the turn of the dial. Here's the point. These save you time. They reduce mistakes, and they make you look more professional. Instead of fiddling around in the menus, you're just one click away from the perfect setup. Even better, even though there are only 3 settings on the dial, you actually get 6 settings. You can set 3 photo settings when your camera is set to photo mode, and then 3 additional video settings when your camera is set to video mode. Now, I've been a professional Canon shooter for over 20 years, and I typically know the menu system like the back of my hand. So when I need to make a change, I'm pretty quick. But lately, I've found myself having to switch between wildly different configurations for different shoots. Think switching from photographing studio portraits to doing real estate photography. For example, let me explain how I use the custom photo shooting modes. I have 2 setups that I use all the time, but they're very different. The first setting is for in-studio portraits in my studio. I shoot these in manual mode, always with a custom white balance. And the shutter and aperture are always at 1/125th at f8, ISO 100. Nearly every session in the studio is going to start with these settings, and it rarely changes. But I'm also equally busy doing real estate photography. And as you can imagine, those settings are going to be much different than studio work in a controlled environment. When I'm shooting real estate photography, I'm shooting in HDR Dynamic Range in aperture priority mode, typically at f8 and usually at ISO 800 indoors. And then I'll switch to ISO 100 outdoors. These 2 modes comprise the vast majority of what I need for my still photos. But that's still a lot of menu clicks between the 2 modes because I'll change the focus modes for each, not to mention all of the other settings. So if I have a real estate session in the morning and a studio portrait in the afternoon, I'm wasting a lot of time racing through the menus, changing settings, with a high likelihood that I'm going to miss something, which typically doesn't look very professional. Not to mention, I use this same camera for filming YouTube videos and real estate video walkthroughs. The same thing would apply for a video. When I'm making a talking head YouTube video right here, the settings are going to be very different than for what I would use if I'm doing a real estate video walkthrough. Switching between those 2 modes requires a massive amount of menu changes, setting myself up for a high likelihood of a mistake. So that's where setting the custom modes can be a real time saver and help with the professionalism. So here's how you set one up. Okay, let's walk through the settings of setting up those C1 and C2 settings for my 2 different modes. I'm going to start by showing you where the register settings are in the menu system. So you notice I'm in the wrench section, the yellow area, and if you scroll over to number 6, you'll see custom shooting mode C1 through C3. If I choose that option, you can see I can register settings, and then I would choose which of the modes I want to use, C1, C2, or C3. You can clear the settings, and then there's the auto update settings. And again, the auto update settings, the way these work, if you set up a custom setting, and we'll just use ISO for example. When I do my real estate photography, when I'm indoors, I typically shoot around ISO 800. But when I go outside, I set it to ISO 100. If auto update settings is enabled, and I make that change from ISO 800 to ISO 100, the C1 or C2 custom shooting mode will remember that. So the next time I choose that particular custom mode, say C1, rather than saying ISO 800, it'll show ISO 100. And then if I were to change that and go back to ISO 800, turn the camera off, come back, the next time I turn it on, it would be on ISO 800. So I don't necessarily want that flipping back and forth, which is why I choose the auto update settings to be disabled. That way, if I make any other changes, whenever I turn my camera off and then I go and I turn those settings back on again, and choose that particular shooting mode, everything will be reset. If you have a reason to have it auto update, then you can absolutely do that, but I find it's just not worth the hassle. I want to have a baseline setting that I can count on. So let's go through and set up for my in-studio portrait setting. So I'm going to jump over to menu 1 and just quickly scroll through here, and I'll make the changes I make for shooting in the studio. So I'm going to make sure that my HDR mode is turned off. Take a quick look at the other modes in here. So my white balance is going to be set specifically to Kelvin, and I'm going to use 5600. That's what my studio lights are set at. So now let's take a look at the autofocus settings. So I want AI autofocus. The autofocus area, I typically just use the center area because I will usually in a portrait setting focus on the eye and then reposition the camera. I want that to track people, and I want it to automatically detect the eye. I could change this to auto. Generally in a studio setting it would work fine, but I find if I have it set on people, it does a really good job of just locking into them and locking onto the eye. And I think that's pretty much the basics for everything I'm going to set for my portrait studios right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the wrench now, go to custom shooting mode, register settings, and choose C1. And it's going to ask me, do I want to register those for C1? I'm going to say okay. Perfect, and those are set. Okay, now what I'm going to do is demonstrate changing all the settings over to my real estate photography settings. The one interesting caveat that I want to talk about is when I shoot real estate, what I typically do is do HDR mode, and I shoot in dynamic range. So I'm going to turn that on, but what happens when I do this and I go to try to set my camera settings to a custom mode, you'll see it's grayed out. So if you've got HDR set, you are not able to choose a custom shooting mode. It says it's restricted by the HDR mode. So what you do in this case, you've got to make sure the HDR mode is turned off. And I can set all the other settings that I normally would, and then I have to remember after I've chosen that custom setting dial on my camera to change it to HDR Dynamic Range, which I typically would know as soon as I took my first image. The shutter should trip 3 times and it'll only trip once, and that'll catch my attention. But let's go through and make all the other changes now. So I'm going to quickly scroll through here. HDR mode is turned off. The white balance I'm going to change over to auto. So I'm going to change the autofocus area to whole area. Then I'm going to go to subject to detect, and you'll notice people's the only option I can choose. I can't choose anything else. So let me show you how to fix that, because that's an interesting little area that you may run into. What you have to do is scroll a couple menus over, and you will see limit subject to detect. Click on that, and you'll notice the only one checked is people. So if I check all of these boxes now, click OK and go back and choose subject to detect, you'll see I can choose auto, animals, vehicles, none, whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and choose auto in this case. And that's pretty much all I need to do on this set of menus. What I'm going to do now is actually go into the main settings of the camera. So let's pull that interface up. And so like I said, I mentioned before, I shoot in aperture priority. So I've already got the camera on aperture priority, as you can tell by the AV in the top left corner. The aperture is set to f8. But the one area I need to change is the ISO. It needs to be changed from auto. I want to lock that in to ISO 800. So there we go. So now I'm going to go back to the menus, make my way over to the wrench. I'm going to go to the custom shooting mode. I'm going to register settings, and I'm going to choose C2. And I'm going to say OK. There we go. Now we've got them set. So now let me show you what it looks like when I change from C1 to C2. So I'm currently in AV mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to custom mode 1. So I'm going to rotate the dial on top of my camera. So you'll notice I'm set to C1. In the top left corner it says C1M. That's C1. That means custom setting 1 and manual mode. Let's check the focus. So if I go down to focus, you can see it's set to AI focus. It's marked for the center point focus. And you'll notice the subject to detect is locked onto people. And it's reverted back to the previous settings where I limited it so that you couldn't change it to anything but people. Now, let's change it over to custom mode 2. And you'll notice on the screen in the top left, it shows C2 AV, which means it's custom mode 2 aperture priority setting. And you'll notice right away on this screen, very quickly, we can see the ISO is set to 800. That was one of the last settings we changed. But now let's go check the focus menu again, just so we can see the difference there. And you'll notice it's gone to whole area focus, and then the subject to detect is auto. So it has retained all of those settings. So the only thing I would need to change now to use this for real estate photography is I would need to go back to the HDR modes, and I would enable dynamic range. And I am all set. I am good to go. You'll notice in the top left it says HDR DR. Unfortunately, I cannot save that particular setting. So whenever I go to do a real estate session, I just have to remember to choose HDR DR. One more quick thing to cover, and that's when you want to set the custom mode settings for video instead of photo. So to do that, we just make a simple change on the top of the camera. We just flip the selector switch from still to video. And once we've made the switch from still to video, you'll notice in the top left corner we see the C1M, but that has changed from a camera icon to a video camera icon. You'll also notice a couple other things. You'll see on the left side it's showing 4K 24 frames a second. You'll also see at the very bottom we've got C-Log set as the video format, and we also are seeing a video histogram up there. So just a reminder, now you have 3 video custom settings you can make along with the 3 custom photo settings. 2 quick tips if you run into issues. If your camera keeps forgetting your tweaks, auto update is probably disabled. And if your C1 and C3 modes get messy, well, you can just go back to the menu, hit clear settings, and this will reset the slot so that you can start over fresh. So that's C1, C2, and C3, your personal presets on the Canon R6 Mark II. Once you set them up, you'll wonder how you've ever shot without them. Now, I'd love to know, what would you save as your 3 go-to presets? Drop it in the comments and I'll pin a couple of the best suggestions so others can try them out. If this video helped you, hit the like button and subscribe for more Canon and YouTube gear tips.